The Awakened Soul, Walking Through Shadows to Discover Your Light, author unknown, a spiritual audiobook. Introduction and core message. The soul awakens when it finds the courage to walk through its shadows to discover its light. This book is an invitation to spiritual growth. Through each page, the anonymous author guides us towards an inner awakening, offering tools to reflect, confront our fears, release the burdens of the past, and embrace the power of the present. Its chapters explore essential themes such as the power of the mind, the connection to the inner self, and the importance of trusting life's process. This text, laden with wisdom, encourages us to discover the light that lies within each of us and reminds us that true transformation begins within. It's a brief yet powerful book, destined to resonate deeply with those who seek not only to understand a spiritual path, but to experience it from the depths of their own being. The Demon of Your Mind. Author unknown, The Meeting of Destinies, a journey begins. The wind whispered through the trees, as if the very earth sought to reveal its ancient secrets. Oliver stood atop the hill, gazing at the horizon, a place where sky and land seemed to merge in an eternal embrace. He had come here, not by conscious choice, but by a call resonating deep within his being, an echo he had ignored for too long. He knew, in the depths of his soul, that this was the beginning of something far grander than himself, something that would forever alter the course of his life. The cold air, heavy with unspoken promises, caressed his face, reminding him that every step he took moved him further from his old self. Somewhere, hidden in the shadows of the past, lay the man he had been, a dreamer trapped by fear, seeking answers in all the wrong places. But that man no longer existed. What remained now was a version of Oliver beginning to understand that destinies aren't chosen, but interwoven in life's mysterious loom, waiting to be discovered. This is the moment, he thought. His eyes gently closed, and in the silence of his mind, images of the past vanished like smoke beneath the sun. What had been no longer mattered. Here, in this space between the known and the unknown, he was free to start anew. It was the dawn of a new reality, but he wasn't alone on this journey. The destiny that had patiently waited now extended its hand, ready to guide him. As he descended the hill, he felt something within him stir. It wasn't a fleeting emotion. It was a force, a murmur of power that had been buried under years of fear, doubt, and hesitation. Now, it rose within him like a river freed from its dam, flowing towards the inevitable. Each step brought him closer not just to a new destination, but to himself. Oliver knew this journey wasn't about finding something external, but about discovering the depths of his own sleeping being. His hands felt new, as if he'd never truly seen them before. How could I have been so blind for so long? He wondered, not with reproach, but with astonishment. The world had always been there, waiting for him to see it clearly, but he was the one who had refused to open his eyes. How many times had he let slip the opportunity to take the reins of his life, to decide his own destiny? Now, standing in the immensity of nature, he understood that it wasn't about physical strength or intelligence, but about will. "This is the beginning," he murmured to himself, as if the words held the power to seal his resolve. He felt it in his chest, in every beat of his heart. He had been reborn. The man he had been was dead, and in his place, someone stronger, someone wiser, emerged. Doubts lingered, whispering in the corners of his mind, but they no longer controlled him. He knew that fear was merely a reflection, a shadow of what had been. Now, he was determined to walk alongside that fear, to learn from it, to tame it as one tames a beast. Days passed, and with them, Oliver learned to see the world differently. Everything he had once taken for granted, he now examined with fresh eyes. Small things, like the wind playing through the leaves or the morning light, felt charged with new meaning. It was as if life itself was speaking to him, whispering the secrets he had been seeking. And what if destiny wasn't something that happened to people, but something one could shape oneself? Oliver began to understand that his journey wasn't just about discovering the world, but rediscovering himself. Each day, a new lesson unfolded before him, and every step he took moved him further from the version of himself he had known all his life. Now, he was the architect of his destiny, the sculptor of his own being. He felt the power in his hands, not as a burden, but as a gift. In the stillness of the night, when the world seemed to pause, Oliver reflected on the path that had brought him here. He knew this was only the beginning. Destiny, that invisible thread that had guided him to this point, continued to weave its silent web, waiting to see how far he could go. And he, with every breath, with every decision, was ready to move forward, without fear, without hesitation, because he knew that deep within his being, the true journey had just begun. "Is this who I've always been?" Oliver asked himself, as the barriers he had built over the years began to crumble. It wasn't a question of despair, but of astonishment. For so long, he had lived under the shadow of what others expected of him, of what he believed he should be. But now, in the stillness of the clearing, he understood that those expectations were mere illusions, veils he had accepted without realizing. "My true self has been here all along," he thought, with a mix of disbelief and relief. He had always searched for something outside himself, answers, validation, success, but true power, true peace, didn't come from without, but from within. Now he understood, and in that understanding, he felt reborn. Oliver closed his eyes, allowing every sensation, every thought to dissolve into the tranquility of the moment. He could feel it. Something within him expanded, as if it finally had the space to exist fully. For so long, he had suppressed that part of himself, the part that didn't fit expectations, that felt uncomfortable in the molds imposed upon him. But now, that version of himself, his true self, began to awaken, gently but unstoppably. It was an awakening that brought no fear or doubt, but a profound peace. Oliver felt as if an invisible weight had lifted from his shoulders. It was as if he had finally stopped fighting himself. Every part of his being, every fragment broken by life's experiences, now united into a new totality. It wasn't an external perfection, but an internal integration, an acceptance of all that he was and all that he had been. "This is who I am," he told himself, not with arrogance, but with a gentle certainty. "I don't need to be more or less, I just need to be." The world around him seemed more alive, more vibrant, as if every leaf and every ray of light shared in his awakening. Oliver opened his eyes, and what he saw wasn't the same world he had known before. It wasn't that the trees had changed or the sun shone differently, but that he saw them with different eyes, with a gaze not filtered by his fears or expectations. What lay before him was pure life, without the distortions his mind had created. "It was always here," he thought as he stood up, "but I couldn't see it until I was able to see it within myself." The truth of his being wasn't something he could find in books or in the words of others. It was something he had to discover on his own, through pain, through love, through falls, and moments of clarity. Every experience, every lived moment, had led him to this point, to this awakening. Oliver knew he hadn't reached an end, but a beginning. The awakening of his true self wasn't a destination, but the start of a new journey, one in which he would no longer have to fight himself. He no longer had to hide parts of his soul or protect himself behind masks. He could walk through life with an open heart, knowing that who he was, in his totality, was enough. As he walked back along the path, Oliver felt a peace he hadn't experienced before. It wasn't the peace that comes from an absence of problems, but the peace born of acceptance, of knowing that no matter what happened, he would no longer hide from himself. He had found within himself something more valuable than any external success, the knowledge of who he truly was. The sun was now high in the sky, illuminating everything around him, but beyond the external light, Oliver felt a new light within him, one that had always been there but that he could now clearly see. And as he continued walking, that light guided him, not towards a fixed destination, but towards the freedom of being authentically himself. He had awakened, and in that awakening, he had found the greatest treasure of all, the freedom to live from his true self, without fear, without doubt, only with the certainty that no matter what, he would always have himself in his purest and most essential form. Facing fear, a journey into the unknown. The wind blew fiercely that night, charged with an unsettling energy that seemed to warn Oliver of what was to come. The stars, usually bright and serene, appeared more distant, as if the sky itself had decided to withdraw, leaving the world alone in its gloom. Oliver stood at the edge of an unfamiliar path, one that delved deep into the forest, a forest that symbolized everything he had avoided for so long. Fear had always been present in his life, like a silent companion, always waiting to be confronted. He had learned to walk alongside it, sometimes even ignoring it, pretending it didn't exist. But he knew that the moment to face it head-on had arrived. He could no longer move forward without confronting the shadows that had followed him for so long. This time, he had to immerse himself in the unknown, and he would do so with the certainty that at the end of the journey, he would discover something beyond fear. he would discover a new version of himself. What do I truly fear? Oliver asked himself, gazing into the darkness that stretched before him. He had avoided that question for years, hiding behind routine, behind decisions that kept him in his comfort zone. But now, in the solitude of the night, he realized that it wasn't the forest, nor what he might find there, that terrified him. It was the uncertainty of not knowing who he would be once he crossed that invisible barrier. Oliver took a deep breath, filling his lungs with cold air, feeling how every particle of that oxygen prepared him for what was coming. This is my moment, he thought. I can't run from this anymore. In the depths of his heart, he understood that fear was not his enemy, but a teacher challenging him to go beyond the limits he had imposed on himself. The first step was the hardest. Feeling the ground beneath his feet begin to transform into unfamiliar terrain reminded him how many times he had recoiled from uncertainty, how many times he had opted for safety instead of venturing into the new. But this time was different. Every step he took forward was an act of courage, not just against the external world, but against his own inner demons. As he walked along the dark path, Oliver felt the silence of the forest begin to speak to him. It wasn't a language of words, but of deep emotions, unresolved memories, fragments of experiences he had left buried in his mind. The fear that had once felt like an external force now enveloped him from within. There were no monsters or physical shadows pursuing him. The true monster was in his mind, in the way he had learned to flee from everything he couldn't control. Fear has always been a part of me, he realized as his thoughts resonated in the dense air. It's not something I can destroy, but it's something I can understand. It was as if a part of him knew that fear, in its essence, was nothing more than an emotion, one he had fueled with doubts and insecurities. But he also knew that, like all emotions, fear could be transformed if one had the courage to look it in the face. Oliver walked with a firm step, yet not without feeling every fiber of his being wanting to turn back, to return to the safety of the known. And yet, something within him pushed him forward, an inner voice reminding him that true growth, true awakening, could only occur when one dared to walk in the darkness without a guarantee of what they would find at the end. At one point, the path narrowed, and Oliver stopped. The shadows around him seemed denser, as if the forest itself tried to close in on him. But this time, there was no doubt. Instead of retreating, instead of letting himself be carried away by the panic that began to surface in his mind, he stood still. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling fear surround him but refusing to let it consume him. I am here, he told himself with a calmness that surprised him. There is nothing to fear beyond what my mind has created. And in that instant, something within him shifted. The fear that had once been an oppressive shadow began to fade, not because it had disappeared, but because it no longer held power over him. Oliver had accepted fear as part of his journey, as a companion that challenged him to grow, to go beyond what he believed possible. And by accepting it, he found a peace he had never before experienced. With fear now a familiar presence, not a threat, Oliver resumed his walk. The forest, though still dark and unknown, no longer seemed so intimidating. Each step he took felt lighter, more purposeful. The journey into the unknown was not just a traversal of the external world, but an exploration of his own being. And as he advanced, he understood that fear was merely a doorway to a deeper part of himself, a part he had avoided for too long. As night began to give way to the first signs of dawn, Oliver reached a clearing in the forest. The sky began to lighten, and the birdsong filled the air with a soft melody, as if the world was welcoming him to a new reality. He had faced fear, not as an enemy, but as an ally that had guided him through the darkness into the light. He paused for a moment, looking at the horizon, feeling how each breath connected him to the world in a way he hadn't felt before. This is what it means to grow, he thought with a soft smile on his lips. It wasn't just an external journey, but a journey into the depths of his soul, and on that journey he had discovered something invaluable. The ability to walk with fear, to listen to it, but not let it control him. Fear was no longer his prison, now it was his teacher. The echoes of failure, rebirth from the ashes. The wind blew cold that morning, carrying a distant echo in the air, a murmur that seemed to drag with it the memories of old defeats. Oliver walked slowly along a path covered with fallen leaves, each step resonating like a beat of his own past. He knew that the failures he had experienced, those that had once defined him, were now just shadows, echoes that still reverberated in his mind but no longer held the power to sink him. Today, he stood before them, not with the pain of the fall, but with the calm of rebirth. Failure, he thought, is a word I had always feared, an idea I had desperately avoided, as if by denying it, I could escape its influence. However, now he understood that failure was not the end, but the prelude to something deeper. It was a fire that burned illusions and exposed what was truly essential. And in that process, he had discovered a truth that could only emerge from the ashes, that falling was merely a stage of flight, a necessary moment to learn to rise again. How many times have I allowed myself to fall without knowing that I was actually learning to get back up? Oliver asked himself, observing the bare branches of the trees around him. For so long, he had seen failure as a mark of his own insufficiency, as evidence that he wasn't strong enough, capable enough. But now, looking back, he saw that each of those failures had been a spark that had led him to a deeper understanding of himself. Every fall has taught me something I wouldn't have learned otherwise, he thought, with a strange mix of sadness and gratitude. He remembered the moments of defeat, those times when everything seemed to crumble around him, when the dreams he had painstakingly built vanished like sand through his fingers. In those instances, the pain of failure was so intense that he could barely bear it. However, he now saw those moments with different eyes, with the wisdom that only time and reflection could bestow. The echo of his failures still resonated in his mind, but now it was a soft echo, not a deafening scream. Oliver understood that each of those failures had been an invitation to look beyond the surface, to see what truly mattered. He was no longer the young man who thought success was measured by external achievements, by goals reached or victories won. Now he knew that true success lay in the ability to rise, to rebuild oneself after a fall, to learn from the ashes, and to keep moving forward. Rebirth isn't about becoming what I was again, he told himself, as his gaze lost itself on the horizon. It's about discovering a new version of myself, stronger, more aware. He was like the ancient legend of the phoenix, consumed by the fire of its own destruction only to be reborn from its own ashes. He was not the same being as before. He was something new, something that carried the memory of pain but also the wisdom that only failure could impart. Every time he had fallen, something within him had changed. Sometimes the fall had forced him to confront truths he didn't want to see. Other times it had stripped him of the illusions he had built around himself. But in each of those falls, he had found the opportunity to see beyond, to rebuild himself from the depths of his being. The memory of his failures was like an invisible scar he carried on his soul, but now that scar no longer caused him pain, but a sense of pride. He had weathered the storms, walked the darkest paths of his own mind, and emerged on the other side, not unscathed, but transformed. Every scar tells a story, Oliver thought as he paused to observe the landscape. He knew that without those marks, without those moments of rupture, he wouldn't be the man he was today. The pain, the doubts, the nights he had thought of giving up, all of it had been necessary for him to reach this point. It was as if each failure had been a brick that, instead of tearing down his spirit, had formed a new foundation upon which to build a more authentic life. Looking back, Oliver realized that failure, instead of being the enemy he had always feared, had been his greatest teacher. It was the echo of those defeats that had resonated within him, urging him to move forward, to learn, to grow. Each time he had fallen, he had had the opportunity to redefine who he was, to let go of the expectations that imprisoned him, and to accept his true self. The sun began to set, painting the sky with golden and red hues, as Oliver sat on a rock, letting the silence envelop him. He had learned to accept failure as part of the journey, not as an end, but as another step in the process of becoming who he truly was. He knew he would continue to face challenges, that falls would remain a part of his life, but he no longer feared them. He knew that from each of them, something new would emerge, something stronger, something truer. Failure is just a pause, he told himself with a smile that now emerged from the depths of his being. It's the space between what was and what I'm destined to be. And in that space, in those ashes, there always existed the possibility of rebirth. As night fell upon him, Oliver felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. He knew that no matter how many times he fell, he would always have the ability to rise, to learn, to move forward, because true failure wasn't in the fall, but in not finding the strength to get up again. And that strength he had found in the depths of his being, in the soft echo of his defeats, in the spark that ignited a new beginning. Rebirth from the ashes was not an act of heroism, but of humility. It was accepting that the path would not always be easy, that success would not always be immediate, but that in every defeat there was a seed of growth, an opportunity for reconstruction. And in that rebirth, he had discovered the greatest truth of all, that his worth lay not in never falling, but in his ability to rise again and again, wiser, stronger, and more aware of his own power. The alchemy of fear, transforming shadows into strength. The night was deep, and the sky appeared as a dark velvet mantle speckled with distant stars. Oliver stood beneath this firmament, feeling the night's shadows envelop him. But this time, it wasn't the darkness that troubled him, but the knowledge that these shadows had always been there, within him, waiting to be understood. Throughout his life, he had fought against fear, believing he had to destroy it, overcome it, leave it behind. But now he understood that true power lay not in eliminating fear, but in transforming it. Fear is just a shadow, he thought, feeling the cold wind caress his face. It's a part of me I've tried to ignore, but it's always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. He had spent years avoiding that darkness, believing that if he simply didn't look, fear would disappear. But in the silence of that night, in the embrace of the darkness, he knew he could no longer run. It was time to look directly at those shadows, not with eyes of rejection, but with the intention of transforming them. Oliver closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. In his mind, the shadows danced, moving with a rhythm of their own, as if they were entities that had patiently awaited this moment. But these shadows no longer seemed so threatening. Instead, they seemed soft, malleable, as if ready to be molded into something new. He had heard that alchemy was the art of transforming the base into the sublime, the mundane into the valuable. And now he understood that fear was his own alchemical material. These shadows, which had paralyzed him for so long, were the raw material for a much deeper transformation. "Fear has been my teacher," he murmured to himself, with a strange mix of respect and gratitude. "It has shown me my limits, my insecurities, but it has also revealed what I am capable of when I decide not to let it dominate me." Oliver knew that fear would not magically disappear, but he also understood that he had the power to change his relationship with it. What had once been an oppressive shadow now became a source of strength. As he walked along the dark path, Oliver could feel the weight of fear in his chest. But this time, he didn't reject it. He allowed that feeling to flood him, to fill him completely. It was uncomfortable, yes, but it was also liberating. He had spent too much time running, too much time fleeing from that discomfort, and now, by allowing himself to feel it, something within him began to change. It was as if by letting fear exist in its totality, it dissolved into something larger, deeper. Fear is not my enemy, he realized as his thoughts aligned with this new understanding. It is a force I can use, like an alchemist who takes the most basic and transforms it into gold. Oliver began to see how fear, that raw energy he had always perceived as destructive, could be molded into something powerful. It was an energy that, when faced and accepted, became a source of courage, a spark that ignited the fire of bravery. The fear that had for so long been a barrier was now an open door, an invitation to explore territories that once seemed inaccessible. Each time Oliver felt that oppression in his chest, he knew he was on the threshold of something important, something worth exploring. It was a sign that he was about to cross an internal frontier, to go beyond what he believed possible. Walking beneath the starry sky, Oliver began to recall the times in his life when fear had held him back, when he had stopped pursuing his dreams for fear of failure or others' judgment. Each of those moments had been a stone in his path, a lost opportunity. But now, with this new understanding, he saw that each of those stones was also a lesson. Fear had not been an insurmountable barrier, but a test, an opportunity to demonstrate his inner strength. "Every shadow has a purpose," he told himself as his feet continued along the dark path. "Every fear has taught me something I couldn't have learned otherwise." It was as if by confronting fear, he had discovered a hidden power, a capacity for transformation that had been dormant within him. Fear no longer paralyzed him. Instead, it urged him forward, to explore what lay beyond the shadows. He paused for a moment and looked up at the sky. The stars, which had once seemed distant and cold, now shone with a new intensity. It was as if the entire universe was whispering to him that true power lay not in the absence of fear, but in the ability to transform it, to convert shadows into light, fear into strength. Oliver breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill his being with a new clarity. He now knew that every time fear arose, every time shadows threatened to cover his path, he would have the tools to face it, not with rejection, but with acceptance and transformation. Alchemy was not just a metaphor, it was a real process happening within him. He took fear, broke it down into its most basic parts, and turned it into fuel for his courage. As he continued walking, he realized that this transformation process had no end. Fear would continue to appear in his life, it would continue to challenge him in unexpected moments, but that no longer worried him. He knew that with each shadow he faced, he would become stronger, wiser, more aware of his own power. I am an alchemist, he thought with a soft smile, not because I transform metals, but because I transform fear into strength, shadows into light. The path continued to stretch before him, and though he couldn't see the end, he no longer felt the need to. He knew that the journey wasn't about reaching a destination, but about the continuous transformation that happened with every step. Every time fear appeared, every time shadows surrounded him, it was an opportunity to delve deeper into himself, to discover new hidden strengths, to keep moving forward, not despite fear, but thanks to it. And so, under the mantle of stars, Oliver walked into the unknown, knowing that no matter what he encountered, he would always have alchemy within him. He would always have the power to transform any shadow into a new source of light. Mastering the inner world, the power of the mind. The silence of early morning enveloped the landscape, and Oliver, sitting by a tranquil lake, contemplated the stillness of the water. The sky began to lighten, but the stars still shone faintly, reflecting on the surface as if the external and internal worlds were intertwining in a subtle dance. Oliver knew that what he saw in the water was not just the reflection of the stars, but also a mirror of his own mind. The gentle ripples were like thoughts flowing ceaselessly, moving with a silent yet unstoppable force. For a long time, he had believed that the external world controlled him. Circumstances, events, the decisions of others, all seemed to determine his destiny. But as he had delved deeper into his own being, he had begun to understand that true power resided not outside him, but in the mind he harbored within. The mind, that vast and unexplored territory, was his inner world, a world he could shape and master if he learned to listen to its rhythms, understand its shadows, and embrace its light. It all begins here, Oliver thought as he closed his eyes and felt his breathing become slower and deeper. Every thought, every emotion, every decision, it all originates in my mind. The mind was not simply a tool, it was a universe in itself, a space where limits didn't exist, where reality could be shaped by the power of imagination and will. Oliver had learned that if he wanted to change his life, he had to start by changing his mind. But this was no simple task. The mind, like a wild river, was full of hidden currents of uncontrollable thoughts that often swept him into directions he hadn't consciously chosen. There were days when he felt he was at the mercy of those thoughts, of the emotions that arose unbidden. But he knew that true mastery lay in learning to observe them, in not being carried away by them, but in consciously choosing how he wanted to navigate that river. Mastering the inner world is the key, Oliver told himself, as his thoughts sank deeper into the stillness of his mind. It's not about controlling every thought or emotion, but about learning to direct the current, to move with it instead of fighting against it. The mind could be a relentless master, but it could also be the most powerful ally if he could align it with his intentions. He recalled the times in his life when he had felt consumed by mental chaos, when his thoughts seemed to race aimlessly, leaping from one fear to another, from one doubt to another, trapping him in a spiral of uncertainty. In those moments, he had felt trapped in an invisible prison, a prison created by his own mind. But now, as he contemplated the lake, he understood that this prison was not real. The mind was malleable, transformable. It could be tamed, but not with force or resistance, but with patience and attention. Every thought is a choice, Oliver reflected. I can choose which thoughts to feed and which to let go. This simple act of choice was immense power, one he had ignored for too long. He had allowed his mind to govern him instead of guiding his thoughts. But now, with each breath, he felt that power returning to him, gently but firmly, like a muscle that had been dormant and was now beginning to strengthen. Oliver slowly opened his eyes and looked at the lake again. The water was completely still, like a mirror reflecting not only the sky but also the peace that was beginning to settle in his mind. It was curious how something so vast as the mind could at the same time be so subtle, so fragile in its balance. He had learned that he could not control what happened in the external world, but he could control how he reacted to it, and that reaction, that inner power, changed everything. The power is not in what happens outside, he told himself, but in how I choose to perceive it within. Internally, Oliver felt he was on the verge of a great revelation. The mind, far from being an enemy to be dominated, was a powerful ally that only needed to be understood. It was not about eliminating negative thoughts or painful emotions, but about learning to look them in the face, to give them their place without allowing them to take control. Every thought, every emotion, was a wave in the vast ocean of his mind. Some waves were gentle, others stormy, but all were part of the same ocean. True mastery, he understood, was learning to navigate those waves, to move with them instead of resisting, to let the current carry him to new understandings and experiences. As he walked back along the path bordering the lake, he felt a new lightness in his being, a sense that everything he had desired was already within his reach. He didn't need to chase it, he didn't need to fight for it. All he had to do was open himself to receive, allowing his inner reality to align with his outer life. He had discovered that creation was not a matter of effort, but of alignment, of vibrating in harmony with the infinite possibilities of the universe. Every thought was a step, every emotion was a guide, and every belief he chose to hold in his mind was a seed that would inevitably blossom. My power doesn't reside in what I do externally, Oliver reminded himself, but in what I choose to believe and feel internally. He knew that life responded to that inner energy, that the opportunities, people, and circumstances that came into his life were not coincidences but reflections of what he was creating within. Oliver paused for a moment and looked towards the horizon, where the sun was beginning to decline, painting the sky with warm colors. It was a moment of stillness, of profound peace, where he felt that everything was in perfect balance. In that silence, he understood that his greatest work of creation was not something he could see or touch, but something that already existed within him, the certainty that everything he needed to manifest a new reality was already in his power. I am the creator of my own life, he thought, as a soft smile crossed his face, not because I control every detail, but because I decide from where I want to live, from what part of myself I want to manifest. He knew there was an immensity of possibilities, that every day was a new opportunity to choose what reality he wanted to build, and in that power of choice, he found his greatest strength, his greatest freedom. The outer world could change, circumstances could transform, but as long as Oliver maintained his center, his inner clarity, everything he desired would inevitably come to him, because true creation did not happen in the outer world, but in that sacred space within his mind and his heart. And so, with the sun fading on the horizon and firm ground beneath his feet, Oliver walked forward, knowing that every step brought him closer to the reality he had already begun to create, a reality born not of circumstances, but of the infinite power he carried within. The path to inner mastery. Walking with courage. Dawn was breaking on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, as if the day were revealing its promises and challenges before fully being born. Oliver watched the growing light from atop a hill, feeling the first rays of sun touch his skin like a gentle invitation to take the next step on his journey. He knew the path he had traveled so far hadn't been easy, but he also knew that every step had brought him closer to something deep, something essential, his own inner mastery. The wind blew softly, caressing his face, and at that moment, Oliver understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving forward despite it. Every step I take on this path, he thought, is an act of courage, not because I am a warrior facing external enemies, but because every day I face the shadows of my own mind, the challenges of my heart, and every day I choose to walk. Courage is not a shout, it's not a flag waving in the wind, Oliver reflected as he began his descent down the hill. It's the gentle whisper that reminds me that even if I can't see the end of the path, I must keep going. There were times when everything seemed uncertain, when the decisions he had to make filled him with doubt, and when the fear of making a mistake clouded his judgment. But now he understood that true inner mastery did not consist of not feeling those doubts, but of moving forward despite them. Each step resonated on the path, and with each one, Oliver felt something within him strengthen, not a physical force, but something deeper, more subtle, a confidence that had begun to grow with every challenge he had overcome. He had learned that courage was not always shown in grand gestures or dramatic moments. Sometimes, the greatest courage lay in waking up each morning and choosing to walk, in choosing to face the parts of oneself that were most difficult to accept. Oliver closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the wind and the distant bird-song envelop him. Every day is an opportunity, he thought, to walk with more courage, to be more at peace with who I am. There were days when he felt the weight of his past held him back, days when the scars of his failures made him doubt his ability to keep going. But now he understood that those scars were not signs of defeat, but marks of his strength. Each of them told a story of overcoming, of resilience, of a man who had fallen and risen again and again. Courage isn't about never falling, Oliver told himself. It's about getting up every time I do, about continuing to believe in my ability to transform every fall into a lesson, every wound into wisdom. Inner mastery was not a state achieved once and for all. It was a path traveled with patience, with acceptance, with a deep trust that even if the journey was long, every step brought him closer to his true self. As he moved along the path, Oliver felt each step connect his body and mind, as if walking were a form of meditation. He recalled the times when he had feared not being enough, not having the necessary courage to face the challenges ahead. Those deeply rooted fears had been like stones in his path, trying to make him stumble, to stop him. But now, as he walked with the sun shining ever more intensely upon him, he understood that courage was not something he had to seek outside himself. It had always been there, waiting to be claimed. Every step I take is a decision, Oliver thought, feeling the warmth of the sun on his back, a decision to walk with courage, to face the unknown with the certainty that no matter what, I can handle it. Courage was not the absence of uncertainty, but the ability to walk with it, to accept that he wouldn't always have all the answers, but that his commitment to himself would guide him on the right path. The path began to descend into a valley, and Oliver paused for a moment to observe the landscape before him. Fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and in the distance, mountains rose imposing and majestic, like guardians of secrets that could only be discovered by walking. He knew his journey was nowhere near over, that there was still much to learn, many shadows to face. But he also knew that he had developed an inner strength that would accompany him wherever he went. This is the true meaning of inner mastery, he thought as he headed towards the valley. It's not about reaching a perfect state of peace or wisdom, but about walking with the willingness to face every new challenge with an open heart. Every day would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth, but Oliver no longer feared what was to come. He knew that whatever the obstacle, he had the courage to face it, to learn from it, and to keep moving forward. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Oliver felt something within him had changed. He no longer walked with the same insecurity he had felt at the beginning of his journey. He had learned that the path to inner mastery was not a straight road, but one full of curves, falls and ascents, moments of doubt and deep clarity. But in every curve, in every step, he had found a new strength within himself, a courage that did not depend on external circumstances, but on his own commitment to his growth. This is my path, Oliver thought with a feeling of profound peace, and I will walk with courage, not because I know every step I must take, but because I trust that every step brings me closer to who I am meant to be. The journey was not complete, but Oliver no longer sought the end. He now understood that inner mastery was not a destination to be reached, but a way of walking, a way of facing every moment with courage, with a heart open to experience and a mind willing to learn. And so, with the sun shining upon him and the wind whispering through the trees, Oliver continued his journey, knowing that no matter what the path held, he had the necessary courage to keep walking. Creation from within, manifesting a new reality. The sky was tinged with a deep blue, as if nature itself were holding its breath, awaiting something grand. Oliver stood in the middle of a field, his feet firm on the damp earth, feeling the pulse of life beneath him. He knew that everything he had ever desired, everything he had ever dreamed, did not depend on external circumstances. He had learned, step by step, that the power to create a new reality resided within him, in that silent place where mind and heart intertwined, forming the fabric of what was to come. For a long time, Oliver had sought answers outside himself, believing that the external world dictated opportunities, limits, success. But now he understood that the external world was merely a reflection of what he carried within. His thoughts, his beliefs, his emotions, all of them wove the reality he experienced. The true power of creation was not an act of magic, but a process of alignment, a process where every part of his being connected with the infinite potential that had always been there, waiting to be unleashed. It all begins here, he thought as he placed a hand over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm that connected him to the universe. What I create in my mind, what I feel in my heart, is what will manifest in my life. It was not an abstract belief, but a truth he had discovered through his own journey. There were times when fear, doubt, or the weight of the past had held him back, but now he knew he had the power to choose, to change his perspective, and with it, change his reality. Oliver recalled the times he had felt life slipping through his fingers, that everything was out of his control. Those moments had taught him that true creation was not a struggle to control the external, but a surrender to the power that existed within him. My reality is not determined by what happens around me, he thought, but by how I choose to perceive it and what I choose to create with it. With his eyes closed, Oliver let his breathing become deeper, slower. In his mind, he began to envision the life he desired, not as a distant yearning, but as an already present reality. He could feel the warmth of the sun on his skin, the sound of the wind through the leaves, but beyond these sensory stimuli, he could feel something more, an internal force that connected him with everything he wished to manifest. Every image, every thought that passed through his mind, was like a seed planted in the fertile ground of his being. And in that internal space, where the real and the imagined merged, he began to build a new reality. Everything I desire already exists, he thought with a certainty that surprised him. It is here, within me, waiting to be manifested. The doubts that had once plagued him slowly dissolved, like mist under the morning sun. He knew he didn't need to force anything, that he didn't have to push the river of life. Everything he needed was already in motion, flowing towards him, attracted by his awakened consciousness and clear intention. Oliver slowly opened his eyes, observing the world around him. The field that once seemed so vast and full of possibilities now appeared as a reflection of what was happening within him. Life was a mirror, returning every thought, every emotion he harbored in his heart. It was as if the world had become more malleable, as if every step he took was shaping the reality around him. And in that shaping, Oliver realized that he was not just creating for himself. Every act of personal creation was an act of creation for the world. By changing my reality, he thought, I am changing the very fabric of the reality I share with others. As he walked across the field, Oliver felt a lightness in his being, a sense that everything he had desired was already within his reach. He didn't need to pursue it, he didn't need to fight for it. All he had to do was open himself to receive, allowing his inner reality to align with his outer life. He had discovered that creation was not a matter of effort, but of alignment, of vibrating in harmony with the infinite possibilities of the universe. Every thought was a step, every emotion was a guide, and every belief he chose to hold in his mind was a seed that would inevitably blossom. My power doesn't reside in what I do externally, Oliver reminded himself, but in what I choose to believe and feel internally. He knew that life responded to that inner energy, that the opportunities, people, and circumstances that came into his life were not coincidences but reflections of what he was creating within. Oliver paused for a moment and looked towards the horizon, where the sun began to decline, tinting the sky with warm colors. It was a moment of stillness, of profound peace, where he felt that everything was in perfect balance. In that silence, he understood that his greatest work of creation was not something he could see or touch, but something that already existed within him, the certainty that everything he needed to manifest a new reality was already in his power. I am the creator of my own life, he thought, as a soft smile crossed his face, not because I control every detail, but because I decide from where I want to live, from what part of myself I want to manifest. He knew there was an immensity of possibilities, that every day was a new opportunity to choose what reality he wanted to build, and in that power of choice, he found his greatest strength, his greatest freedom. The outer world could change, circumstances could transform, but as long as Oliver maintained his center, his inner clarity, everything he desired would inevitably come to him, because true creation did not happen in the outer world, but in that sacred space within his mind and his heart. And so, with the sun fading on the horizon and firm ground beneath his feet, Oliver walked forward, knowing that every step brought him closer to the reality he had already begun to create, a reality born not of circumstances, but of the infinite power he carried within. The dance between light and shadow. Oliver stood at the edge of a cliff, the wind sweeping across his face, moving the waves below as if the ocean responded to the pulse of his own heart. It was an imposing image, the vast sea stretching before him, touched by the last rays of sun, and behind it, the shadows of night beginning to envelop the land. He couldn't help but feel how this contrast between light and darkness didn't just occur in the world around him, but also within himself. It has always been this way, he thought with a profound reflection that seemed to rise from the depths of his being. Light and darkness, two forces that don't compete, but dance together, creating the balance that sustains everything. In his life, he had felt the light of clarity, hope, and certainty, but he had also known the darkness of doubts, fears, and moments when everything seemed on the verge of collapsing. And now, in this majestic scene, he understood that both forces were not opposites, but complementary, intertwined in an eternal dance. The sun finally disappeared behind the horizon, leaving only the orange stripe of twilight. Oliver breathed deeply, watching as darkness enveloped the world. At another time, He might have felt fear in the face of that darkness, in the face of what he couldn't see or foresee. But not today. Today, that darkness felt like an old friend, a companion who had always been there, showing him parts of himself that light would never have revealed. In darkness, he told himself, is where I have learned to find my true strength. It wasn't an easy discovery. The deepest nights of his life had pushed him to places he would have preferred to avoid, moments where everything seemed meaningless, where the shadows of his own thoughts dragged him into the unknown. But now, with a new perspective, he understood that darkness was not the enemy of light, but its complement. In those moments of deepest shadow, he had found the opportunity to rediscover his inner light, that spark that never disappeared, even when it seemed to dim. The night breeze was cold, but it didn't bother him. In fact, Oliver felt it as a reminder that he was alive, that between light and darkness, his own being vibrated, full of contrasts. We all carry this duality within, he thought as his steps took him away from the cliff, into a small forest. The leaves crunched under his feet, and the tall, majestic trees formed tangled shadows that moved with the wind. As he walked, the darkness grew denser, but instead of getting lost in it, Oliver began to feel a strange calm. He knew the light would appear again, that the cycle would continue, but for now, he embraced the moment, allowing himself to feel the weight and depth of the darkness surrounding him. There was no struggle, no resistance. It was as if, for the first time in his life, both forces were in balance within him. In a clearing in the forest, Oliver stopped and sat on the ground, feeling the firm earth beneath his hands. The sky above was a mix of the last twilight lights and the stars that were beginning to appear, timid at first, but soon filling the firmament. Light and darkness are like these stars, he reflected in silence. Neither of them can exist without the other. It had been a long road to reach this understanding. There were times when darkness had frightened him so much that he had blinded himself to any possibility of light, and others when the light was so dazzling that he couldn't see the shadows hiding behind it. But today, sitting under that starry sky, Oliver understood that it was not about choosing one over the other. Life, like the cosmos, was made up of both, in a delicate balance that gave meaning to everything. As he contemplated the sky, Oliver began to think about his own life, how that dance between light and darkness had shaped each of his experiences. The light of moments of triumph, of love, of clarity, had given him strength, but the darkness of challenges, pain, and doubts had given him wisdom. Both were necessary. Both wove the fabric of his existence. We walk between light and shadow, he told himself, this time with a profound peace, and in that dance, we find who we truly are. There was no longer fear of what might come, no longer resistance to what he didn't understand. Oliver had learned that every step in that dance offered him a new opportunity to know himself, to grow, to integrate more completely. It was not about eliminating darkness or clinging only to light. It was about embracing both, moving with them like a dancer following the rhythm of a melody that never ceases. The wind whispered through the trees, and in that sound, Oliver felt a response, as if nature itself spoke to him. He closed his eyes, allowing that moment to fill him completely. In his mind, he could see the dance of light and darkness, not as conflicting forces, but as partners intertwining in a harmonious movement. Each had its role. Each was essential to the other. And in the midst of it all, there was he, not as a passive observer, but as part of that dance, as someone who learned to move with grace between both extremes. I am both light and shadow, Oliver whispered, not as a mere affirmation, but as a truth resonating deep within his being. He had reached a point in his life where he understood that he didn't need to choose between one and the other. Both offered him something valuable. Both showed him facets of himself he would otherwise never have known. The sky above began to change again, with the first signs of dawn appearing on the horizon. The dance continued, always in motion, always transforming. And as the light slowly returned, Oliver stood up, feeling that something within him had also changed. It wasn't about understanding everything or having all the answers, but about being willing to walk between these two forces, to allow both to shape him, to guide him, to take him beyond what he had known before. The sun began to illuminate the world once more, but now, for Oliver, that light had a new meaning. It was not the end of darkness, but the next step in the dance that never ceased. And in that dance, he had found a new way of being, a new way of existing, where both light and shadow were his companions, his guides, his teachers. With a heart full of gratitude, Oliver continued walking, knowing that no matter how many times the cycle between light and darkness changed, he would always find his place in that eternal dance. The art of letting go, trusting the process. The afternoon air was imbued with a gentle warmth, and Oliver, sitting by a serene river, observed the constant flow of the water. In his mind, always so agitated, questions and worries swirled like leaves caught in a whirlpool. However, at that moment, something within him began to yield. The words "let go" and "trust" echoed faintly, resonating within his being. But what did it truly mean to let go? It's not as simple as saying it, he thought as a small branch, carried by the current, floated past him. Letting go isn't about giving up, it's about releasing the control I've tried so hard to exert over everything. For as long as he could remember, he had fought against uncertainty, trying to control every aspect of his life, as if by doing so he could ensure everything would go well. But now, sitting on the bank of that river flowing without resistance, he began to understand that sometimes the most powerful thing he could do was to simply surrender. The act of letting go was not a passive gesture, he realized. It required deep trust in the process, a surrender to something greater, something that couldn't always be understood by the rational mind. Oliver looked at the water, fascinated by how each current seemed to know exactly where it needed to go, without rushing or resisting. If the river doesn't struggle to flow, he thought, why do I? Throughout his life, he had tried to cling to so many things, to ideas, to people, to situations. He had believed that by maintaining firm control, he could avoid pain, loss, failure. But now, with the sound of the river filling the silence, he understood that this need for control had been what most prevented him from moving forward. The times he had felt stuck, unable to move, hadn't been because life held him back, but because he hadn't been able to let go enough to flow with it. Trusting the process, he murmured to himself, isn't about giving up, it's about allowing the path to unfold without forcing it. Oliver began to understand that letting go was not surrendering to inaction, but rather a conscious action of ceasing to try to control the uncontrollable. It was allowing the natural course of events to take him where he needed to be, without the constant interference of his own mind. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, let himself be carried away by the sound of the water. In that instant, something shifted within him. It wasn't a great revelation or a moment of dramatic enlightenment, but there was a stillness he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if by letting go of control, he had made space for something greater, trust. Oliver recalled the times in his life when he had tried to force outcomes, when he had fought against the current, only to find that the more he struggled, the further he seemed to be from what he truly desired. The process is wiser than me, he thought, almost with a hint of a smile. Perhaps my task isn't to know everything, but to learn to trust the flow of life. It wasn't an act of blindness, but of profound wisdom. By letting go of control, he was choosing to trust that somehow the pieces would fit together, that the river of life would take him exactly where he needed to be. Leaves gently fell from nearby trees, some landing on the water's surface, floating without resistance. Oliver slowly stood up, his bare feet sinking into the damp grass as he began to walk, following the river's course. He didn't need to know where that path was going, he just knew he had to walk. Sometimes life would lead him to unexpected places, and he wouldn't always understand why immediately. But now, more than ever, he was willing to allow those mysteries to reveal themselves in their own time. I don't always have to know the end, he reflected, feeling that understanding envelop him with a new warmth. Letting go was releasing the need to have all the answers at that precise moment. It was knowing that life's process was not linear, that it had twists and surprises, and in that acceptance, there was a freedom he had never felt before. Every step he took felt lighter, as if by letting go of control, he had also released the weight he carried. To let go is to trust the unknown, he thought as a soft gust of wind rustled the branches around him. The wind, like the river, had no fixed destination, yet always knew where to go. Perhaps that was what it meant to trust the process, to walk with the certainty that even if he couldn't always see the whole path, every step would bring him closer to his purpose. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with orange and gold hues, Oliver found a small clearing where he sat to observe the horizon. There was something in that moment, something in the simplicity of sitting and letting the day end, that filled him with peace. He had nothing to solve, nothing to analyze. He just needed to be present, allowing the world to move at its own pace. The art of letting go, he murmured softly, is learning to dance with what life gives me instead of fighting against it. Sometimes life would offer him challenges, difficult moments, but even those moments had their place in the process. Every fall, every pause, every doubt was part of the journey, and by learning to let go, Oliver was discovering a new way to walk through life, one in which resistance was not his companion, but trust. Night gently arrived, and the stars began to appear one by one, as if the universe were reminding him that there was always more beyond what he could see. Oliver lay back on the grass, observing the infinite sky. In that stillness, he felt that something within him had changed. The control that had once seemed so necessary now felt like a burden he no longer needed to carry. There was a beauty in letting go, in trusting that life itself would guide him. Not everything depends on me, he thought with a deep sense of relief. The process is greater than I can comprehend. And in that recognition, Oliver found a new strength, one that did not come from controlling every step, but from trusting that by letting go, there would always be something waiting for him on the other side. Perhaps not what he expected, perhaps something better. With a smile on his lips and a lighter heart, Oliver closed his eyes, allowing himself to rest in the certainty that life, with all its mystery, was on his side. Embracing the journey, the path of the enlightened mind. The air was charged with a special stillness, as if the world had paused for a moment to allow Oliver to reflect on everything he had traversed. He walked slowly along a path covered with dry leaves that crunched under his feet, reminding him that every step in life left a footprint, though not necessarily visible to the outside world. Around him, the forest seemed silent, but Oliver knew that within that apparent stillness, there was life, a constant cycle that didn't need to be understood to continue its course. Such is the journey, he thought, feeling a wave of emotions cross his chest. A cycle I don't always understand, but one that always continues. It had been a long road to this point, one full of falls, triumphs, and deep silences. But now, with a broader perspective, Oliver understood that the journey itself was the destination, and the enlightened mind was not a state suddenly reached, but a transformation that occurred gradually, with every step taken and every lesson learned. The enlightened mind, for Oliver, was no longer a distant goal. He realized it had always been present in the simplest and most complex moments. He had learned to recognize that clarity did not always come in the form of definitive answers, but in the peace he found by accepting what he did not know. Enlightenment was not a lamp that suddenly turned on, but a series of small, subtle flashes that appeared on the path when he least expected them. Every step has brought me here, he told himself with a mix of humility and gratitude. The journey hadn't been easy, but now he understood it wasn't meant to be. Moments of doubt, frustration, even pain, had been silent teachers, showing him parts of himself he would otherwise never have known. And though he had sometimes wished to take shortcuts, he now saw that every detour, every apparent obstacle, had been an essential part of his growth. Oliver breathed deeply, letting the cool air fill his lungs. Before him, the path forked, but this time he felt no rush to decide. He knew the right path wasn't about which route he took, but how he walked. The path isn't what I see before me, he thought, but what I carry within me as I walk it. There was a time when he would have felt fear of not knowing where he was going, but now, after all he had lived, he understood that true power lay in embracing the journey, in trusting that every step brought him closer to a deeper understanding, even if he couldn't see it at the moment. The enlightened mind was not one that had all the answers, but one that accepted that some answers wouldn't come immediately, and that was okay. Walking along the chosen path without haste, Oliver felt the landscape around him subtly change. The forest slowly opened up, revealing open fields and clear skies. He realized that the journey was not just a metaphor, but an experience he lived in every cell of his body. The external changes reflected the internal changes, and vice versa. What had begun as a dark path through trees now unfolded into a wide, light-filled space. Such is life, Oliver thought with a calmness that surprised him. First we traverse the darkness, and then we emerge into clarity. But even in clarity, he knew darkness was not something to fear. He had learned that both light and shadow were part of the same whole, and that the enlightened mind was not one that avoided darkness, but one that knew how to walk through it serenely. The sun began to set on the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, and Oliver felt that moment encapsulate everything he had learned. The sunlight and the shadows of the trees blended in perfect harmony, and in that image, he saw his own journey reflected. There were moments of absolute clarity where everything seemed to make sense, and there were moments of uncertainty where answers hid in the gloom. But both were necessary for his growth. Both were part of the journey toward true understanding. The path of the enlightened mind is not linear, he reminded himself. It is a spiral, a cycle of learning, unlearning, and relearning. Oliver had stopped looking for the end of the journey, because he now understood that there was no final destination. Enlightenment was not a place he arrived at to stay, but a series of moments of deep connection with the present, with his own being, and with the universe. As he moved forward, Oliver began to feel a lightness in his being. He had shed many of the burdens that once weighed him down, the need to know, to control, to understand everything. Now he walked with the confidence that every step would take him exactly where he needed to be, even if that place was not what he expected. True mastery, he thought, is learning to walk without expectations but with full attention. He had learned to trust the process, to accept the rhythms of life without resistance. The enlightened mind, in the end, was not a mind that understood everything, but one that knew how to be at peace with what it did not understand. And in that acceptance, Oliver found a freedom he had never known before. The day began to grow dark, but instead of feeling the melancholy that often came with an ending, Oliver felt a deep gratitude for the natural cycle of things. Every end brought with it a new beginning, every shadow contained the seed of light. This is the journey, he thought as he looked at the stars beginning to appear in the sky, one that never ends, but always brings me closer to myself. Oliver paused for a moment, looking back down the path he had traveled. He did not do so with nostalgia, but with gratitude. Every step, every fall, every moment of doubt had been essential to reaching this point. And although he knew the journey continued, he also understood that he didn't need to rush. Everything would come in its own time, at its own pace. With a heart full of peace and a clear mind, Oliver continued walking under the stars, knowing that no matter where the path led him, he would always find in it a new opportunity to embrace the journey and continue awakening to the wisdom of his enlightened mind. The wisdom of the ages, lessons from fear. The moon hung high in the sky, casting its silvery light over the vast expanse of land before Oliver. The landscape was bathed in soft hues, creating an atmosphere of mystery and reflection. There was something about that night that invited him to look inward, to explore the depths of his own being, where fear, always present in some corner, awaited to be understood. Oliver paused, observing the moon's reflection in a nearby lake. The calm water reminded him how, in his youth, fear had been a paralyzing force, a relentless shadow that seemed to grow with every step he took into the unknown. But now, after all he had lived, after facing so many of his shadows, he understood that fear was not simply an enemy to be conquered. There was an ancient wisdom within it, a lesson that life tried to teach him again and again. Fear is not my oppressor, he thought as a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the trees around him. It is my teacher, the oldest of them all. There were times when Oliver had felt fear consume him, when every decision he made was permeated by that dense, dark energy. Sometimes it was a small, almost imperceptible fear, like a distant voice whispering doubts. Other times it was an uncontrollable torrent, dragging him to places he didn't want to visit. But reflecting on those moments now, he realized that each of those episodes had left him with something invaluable, a teaching, a new understanding of himself and the limits he was destined to overcome. Fear has revealed who I am, he told himself, not in the moments he had overcome it, but in the moments when he had walked alongside it, when he had felt its presence and yet had decided to keep going. Oliver watched the stars beginning to appear one by one, like ancient lighthouses of wisdom. This sky has seen generations face their fears, he thought, and somehow he felt connected to that chain of souls who, throughout the ages, had learned similar lessons. Fear was not exclusive to him or his time. It was a universal force, an inherent part of the human experience. As he walked around the lake, Oliver recalled one of the darkest moments of his life, a time when fear had pushed him into a despair he didn't think he could overcome. It had been a moment when everything seemed to crumble, when every step forward felt like a step backward. Fear had enveloped him like a heavy cloak, blocking any ray of hope. But though he didn't understand it then, that very fear had been the catalyst for his greatest transformation. Fear led me to discover strengths within me that I didn't know existed, he thought, almost with astonishment. It hadn't been easy, much less pleasant, but fear had pushed him to look within himself for a light he had never had to ignite before. It is in darkness, he reminded himself, where we learn to recognize our own light. Walking beyond the lake, towards a group of trees that formed a small forest, Oliver began to feel the weight of that truth. He had spent so much time trying to avoid fear, fighting against it, that he had forgotten what it truly meant. Now, with every step among the shadows of the trees, he understood that fear was not something to be feared, but something to be embraced. In that darkness, in that not knowing, in that feeling of uncertainty, there was a power that could only be discovered by traversing it. Fear teaches me to be brave, he thought, not by fleeing from it, but by walking with it, step by step, until it dissolves into understanding. He felt that the wisdom of fear was not in conquering it, but in learning from it, in letting it reveal the parts of himself he had not yet faced. Fear was like a mirror, showing him his insecurities, his self-imposed limits, the unexplored corners of his soul. The trees opened before him, revealing a clearing illuminated by the moonlight. In that open space, surrounded by nature, Oliver sat on a large, cold rock, allowing the stillness of the place to envelop him. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. In his mind, he began to review the times when fear had guided him to places that, though uncomfortable, had been necessary. Fear had been his companion in the most important decisions of his life. It had shown him which paths not to take and had prompted him to jump when it would have been easier to remain still. And now, sitting in that solitary clearing, Oliver understood that fear was not an enemy to be destroyed, but a force with which he had to learn to live. Every time I face my fear, I get closer to my truth, he thought with a clarity he had never felt before. Fear was not the antithesis of courage, but its precursor. There could be no true courage without fear, and in each of those moments, he had found a truth that only fear could reveal to him, that he was stronger than he thought, more capable than he believed, and more resilient than he imagined. The clearing filled with a soft light, and Oliver felt a profound peace. He no longer needed to fight fear, he no longer needed to eliminate it. He had learned that fear was his travel companion, one that constantly reminded him that he was alive, that he was growing, that he was moving forward. "Fear is wisdom," he whispered with a smile that originated from the depths of his being. "It is the oldest lesson life teaches me again and again." The stars shone brightly now, and Oliver, looking up at the sky, understood that there would always be fear, there would always be challenges that would push him out of his comfort zone. But he also knew that in each of those challenges, he would find the opportunity to learn, to grow, and to connect more deeply with the wisdom of the ages. "Fear has made me who I am," he thought as he rose from the rock, feeling a new strength within him, and with that understanding, he continued his path, knowing that the lessons of fear would never end, nor would his capacity to learn from them. Beyond the horizon, a new beginning. The morning air was imbued with the promise of a new day. Oliver watched the horizon, where the shy but determined sun began to rise. The colors of dawn blended in the sky, creating a palette of golds, pinks, and violets. Each sunrise was unique, as if nature itself painted a new opportunity with each awakening. Oliver, standing on a hill, felt something within him also awaken, something that had been dormant for a long time. "It's time to start anew," he thought as his eyes followed the sun's slow ascent. It wasn't about forgetting the past or discarding what he had lived, but about accepting that everything that had happened until that moment had been part of a journey towards this precise instant. A new beginning was not the end of what was before, but the fruit of everything learned, everything overcome, everything felt. As the wind gently caressed his face, Oliver closed his eyes, allowing the silence of the morning to envelop him. He felt each breath connect him to something larger than himself, something he couldn't see but that had always been there, guiding his path from the shadows. "This is my moment," he thought, "my opportunity to go beyond what I have been, beyond what I have known." The horizon stretched before him, vast and endless, and in that landscape, Oliver found a reflection of his own being. For so long, he had believed that the horizon marked a limit, a point beyond which he could not see. But now he understood that the horizon was not a limit, but an invitation to move forward, to explore, to discover what lay beyond. "Beyond the horizon is what I never imagined," he thought, his mind wandering into the unknown. He had felt fear at other times, fear of what he couldn't control, fear of what he couldn't predict. But today, that fear did not govern him. There was a strange peace in accepting what he did not know, in walking into the uncertain without having all the answers. Life was not a series of certainties, but a constant flow of discovery. He opened his eyes and began to walk. Every step he took was like an affirmation of his decision to keep going. There was no defined plan, no fixed goal. But something deeper guided him. Oliver knew that the true journey was not to a destination, but to himself, and with each step, he felt himself leaving behind old versions of himself, the doubts, the fears that had held him back before. The sun was now higher in the sky, illuminating the path Oliver had chosen. As he walked, He could feel the weight of what had been slowly detaching from his shoulders. The invisible burdens of expectations, past failures, and unfulfilled dreams no longer followed him. Instead, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in a long time. "This is my new beginning," he thought, and in that affirmation, he found unexpected strength. The horizon was no longer a distant point, but a door opening to infinite possibilities. He didn't need to know where the path would take him. The important thing was that he was walking, that he had decided to move, that the horizon no longer intimidated him, but called to him. As he continued forward, Oliver noticed that the landscape around him changed subtly. What was once a grass-covered hill transformed into a valley full of wildflowers, each moving with the wind as if they too were beginning a new cycle of life. Nature always starts anew, he thought. Everything that ends is simply the beginning of something more. He had witnessed how the seasons changed, how life constantly renewed itself around him, but he had never so deeply felt that cycle within himself. In the past, he had feared endings. He had fought against them as if in every closure there was something definitive, something irreparable. But now, walking into the unknown, he understood that every ending brought with it the seed of a new beginning. Oliver breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill his lungs, revitalizing his spirit. Every step forward took him away from the echoes of the past, but not from its lessons. It wasn't about ignoring what had been lived, but about walking with what had been learned. The scars he carried on his soul were not open wounds, but marks that reminded him of his strength, his ability to keep going despite everything. What lies beyond the horizon is not just a new place, he thought, it is a new version of myself. It was as if the universe was inviting him to explore what had been dormant within him, waiting for the right moment to emerge. He knew there was no map to guide him, but he didn't need one either. He trusted his intuition, his ability to adapt, to learn, to grow. The day progressed, and with it, Oliver's journey. As the sun continued its ascent, the gentle midday warmth surrounded him, filling him with renewed energy. He now understood that every new beginning was not a leap into the void, but a leap into himself, into a version of him that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. He didn't need to cling to what had been, nor worry about what was to come. The horizon, with its promise of the unknown, was now a symbol of freedom. It was not a barrier, but a reminder that there was always something more to explore, something more to discover, both in the outer world and within himself. Upon reaching the top of another hill, Oliver paused for a moment and looked back. The path he had traveled was no longer visible, hidden by distance and time. He felt no nostalgia, but gratitude. Every step had been necessary. Every detour, every choice had led him to this point. A new beginning is not just the start of something new, he thought. It is the result of everything I have lived. The horizon continued to call him, and with a soft smile, Oliver kept walking. The path unfolding before him was unknown, but it no longer frightened him. He knew that the true journey would always be within him, and that every time he reached the horizon, there would be another one beyond it, waiting for him. And so, with the sun shining high and his heart full of hope, Oliver walked forward, confident that every new beginning would lead him closer to the truth of who he truly was. The process of improvement. Walking towards your true self. There comes a moment in life when we realize we can't keep living the same way. Perhaps you felt it already, that sensation in your chest that something must change, that you deserve something deeper, more authentic. If you're here reading these words, it's because somewhere in your heart you've already heard that call. And I want to tell you something important. The process of improvement you seek is not a distant destination. It's not a far-off goal you'll reach someday. It's happening here, now, in this very instant. Allow me to guide you along a path that, though it is uniquely yours, has also been mine and that of many others before you, a path of transformation, growth, and discovery. But make no mistake, this process isn't always easy. Sometimes you'll feel like you're taking one step forward and 2 steps back. Sometimes you'll find yourself facing your own fears, your own insecurities. And it will be in those moments when you must trust yourself the most. First, where you are. The first, and perhaps most difficult, step of all is accepting where you are right now. Not where you think you should be, not where others expect you to be, but right here, exactly at the point you find yourself. Accepting doesn't mean resigning yourself. It means looking at yourself with compassion and saying, "This is who I am now, and that's okay." Every scar, every wound, every triumph, and every defeat has brought you here. This is your starting point, and it is perfect just as it is. The mistake many make is wanting to rush into change, skipping steps, looking for a shortcut. But true change begins with acceptance. It's only when you accept the present that you can transform it. Second, listen to your fear. I know fear can be paralyzing. I felt it so many times that I thought it would consume me. But listen closely. Fear is not your enemy. Fear is a signal, a guide that shows you where you need to focus your attention. Instead of avoiding it, approach it. Sit with it. Ask it what it has to say to you. Often, fear is nothing more than a reflection of our doubts, our insecurities about what we believe we deserve. But when you listen to it, when you understand it, it loses its power. Third, trust the process. This path you've chosen to walk is not linear. There will be days when you feel like you're making giant strides, and others when it seems like you're not moving at all. There will be moments when you think you're going backward. But I assure you, you're not. Every experience, every moment of doubt, every pause, is part of the process. Trust it. Growth isn't always visible. Sometimes the seeds you plant within take time to blossom, but that doesn't mean they're not taking deep root. Allow yourself that time. Don't rush the process. Fourth, learn to let go. One of the deepest lessons you'll learn on this path is that of detachment. Letting go doesn't mean giving up on your dreams or desires. On the contrary, it means trusting yourself and life enough not to cling to control. Life has its own rhythm, its own wisdom, and when you learn to let go, you create space for things to flow, for the unexpected to come to you. Letting go is one of the most powerful acts you can do. It's an affirmation that you trust yourself, your ability to adapt, to change, to receive what truly belongs to you. Fifth, be gentle with yourself. Throughout this process, you will face parts of yourself you may not like, mistakes you wish you hadn't made, old wounds you'd rather forget. But it's in those moments when you must practice gentleness with yourself the most. Don't punish yourself for not being perfect. Don't demand more of yourself than you can give right now. Personal improvement is not a race. It's not a challenge you must overcome overnight. It's a lifelong journey, one where every step, no matter how small, counts. Celebrate your progress, however subtle it may seem. Applaud your courage for moving forward. Sixth, remember you are not alone. This path of improvement can feel lonely at times, but I want you to know that it isn't. Many have walked this path before you, and many will walk it after you. Every human being faces their own inner battles, their own fears and hopes. And though each process is unique, there is a deep connection that unites us all. We are all searching for something: peace, love, meaning. Seek that connection. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. There's no shame in admitting you don't have all the answers. True strength lies in recognizing that we are part of something larger, something that transcends our individuality. Finally, open your heart. Ultimately, what will take you furthest on this path is opening your heart. The mind can guide you to a certain extent, but it is the heart that will truly lead you to your true self. Open yourself to what life has to offer you. Open yourself to the possibility of a new beginning, of a new way of being. Allow yourself to feel, even when the feeling is uncomfortable. Allow yourself to love, even when fear whispers otherwise. The process of improvement is not just mental, it is deeply emotional and spiritual. It is a dance between what you know and what you don't yet understand. And I assure you that with every step you take, with every lesson you learn, you get closer to the person you are meant to be. This is your journey. This is your moment. And though the horizon may still seem distant, with each passing day, you draw a little closer to it. Trust yourself. Trust the process. And always remember, what you seek is already within you, waiting to be discovered.